Desperation has a specific smell. It's stale coffee, rain-soaked wool, and the metallic tang of fear. When she walked into the office of the city's most dangerous man, she reeked of it. She just wanted a job, a way to keep the lights on and the eviction notices at bay. She didn't know the worn Polaroid tucked inside her cheap plastic folder was about to dismantle an empire. He was ready to kill her. Then he saw the picture. The harbour district did not sleep so much as it lay in wait. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, Leo watched the rain hammer against the asphalt of the loading docks. The sound was a dull, rhythmic thud, white noise that usually helped him think. Tonight, it just gave him a headache. His office sat 3 stories above the Atlantic shipping and freight warehouse. To the city inspectors, it was a mid-level logistics hub. To the men who knew better, it was the carotid artery of the East Coast's illicit supply chain. Leo rubbed the bridge of his nose, the abrasive scrape of his thumb against day-old stubble, loud in the quiet room. On his desk sat a ledger, 2 encrypted burner phones, and a glass of scotch that had long since grown warm. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that a weekend in the Hamptons could fix. It was a bone-deep exhaustion, the accumulated weight of a decade spent anticipating knives in the dark. The heavy oak door to his office clicked. It didn't burst open. It didn't swing wide with the dramatic flair of a rival's ambush. It simply opened, hesitant and slow, as if the person on the other side was waiting for permission that was never going to come. Leo didn't reach for the gun in his desk drawer. Real violence rarely announced itself with a polite knock. He just went still, his eyes locked on the widening gap. A woman stepped into the room. She didn't belong here. That much was immediately violently obvious. She wore a tan trench coat that had seen better decades, the hem darkened with rainwater. Her boots were scuffed leather, practical and cheap. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks, framing a face that was sharp pale and tight with a very specific brand of exhaustion. She stood dripping onto the $200,000 Persian rug, clutching a cracked blue plastic folder to her chest like a shield. Behind her, the massive frame of Dex Leo's night shift security lid materialized in the hallway. Dex looked breathless, a vein throbbing at his temple. "Boss!" Dex said, his voice a gravelly rumble of panic. "I don't know how she got past the gate. Jimmy was supposed to be on the side door." "I was doing the perimeter check." "Shut up, Dex," Leo said. His voice was low, devoid of inflection. He didn't look at his guard. His dark eyes remained fixed on the woman. "Who are you?" She swallowed hard. The muscles in her throat worked visibly. But when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. "My name is Nora Hayes. I'm looking for Mr. Russo." Leo leaned back in his leather chair. The leather creaked. "Russo. The hiring manager. I was told he handles the accounting department for the freight manifest side. Russo had a massive coronary last Tuesday in the parking lot of a diner in Southie," Leo said, watching her face for a reaction. "He's currently residing in an urn on his ex-wife's mantle. So whoever told you to come here has outdated information and a terrible sense of humor." Nora blinked. The news hit her, but not with grief. It hit her like a physical blow to her immediate survival. She briefly closed her eyes, and in that microsecond, Leo saw the vast, sprawling architecture of her despair. She was drowning, and Russo had been a piece of driftwood. "I see," she said, opening her eyes. She gripped the blue folder tighter. "Who took over his accounts?" Dex stepped forward, a massive hand reaching for Nora's shoulder. "All right, lady, you heard the man. Turn around, let's go." Nora flinched her shoulder, dropping to evade the heavy hand, but she didn't retreat. She stepped further into the office, putting herself out of Dex's immediate reach. It was a stupid suicidal move. It was also incredibly brave. "I need a job," she said, looking directly at Leo. "This isn't a temp agency, Miss Hayes. I have 2 degrees in forensic accounting. I can balance ledgers that have been cooked so hot they're charred. I worked for Vanguard Financial for 5 years before." She stopped biting the inside of her cheek. "Before I became unemployable in the corporate sector. I know what this building is. I know what Atlantic shipping really moves. I don't care. I need a job. I will work 80 hours a week, and I don't ask questions." Leo stared at her. He evaluated her the way a mechanic evaluates a broken engine, calculating the cost of fixing it versus scrapping it. She was a whistleblower. It took him 2 seconds to deduce that. Vanguard Financial had a massive scandal 8 months ago. Some mid-level analyst had leaked internal documents showing they were defrauding pensioners. The analyst got fired, sued into oblivion, and quietly blacklisted. The executives got bonuses. She was smart, she had a moral compass, and she was desperate enough to break it. "You're a liability," Leo said simply. "You grew a conscience once. People who grow consciences in my line of work end up in the harbor. The fact that you walked into my office proves you're either dangerously naive or dangerously reckless. I have no use for either." He nodded at Dex. "Get her out of here. If she resists, break her legs." Dex didn't hesitate this time. He lunged. Nora backed up her boots, squeaking on the wet hardwood at the edge of the rug. Panic finally breached the wall of her composure. "Wait." Dex grabbed her upper arm. His grip was industrial fingers digging into her bicep, hard enough to bruise the bone. Nora gasped, twisting sharply to break the hold. In the brief, violent scuffle, her numb fingers lost their grip on the blue plastic folder. It hit the floor. The cheap plastic clasp snapped. Papers exploded across the intricate red and gold weave of the rug. Resumes, tax forms, heavily redacted letters of recommendation, past due medical bills. They fluttered down like dead leaves. "Get off me," Nora hissed, shoving at Dex's chest, but it was like pushing a brick wall. "Enough," Leo snapped. Dex froze, his hand still clamped on Nora's arm. Leo stood up. He didn't look at Nora. He was looking at the mess on his floor. He hated disorder. He hated the intrusion of someone else's chaotic life into the sterile, controlled environment he had meticulously built. He walked around the heavy mahogany desk, intending to tell Dex to drag her out by her hair if necessary. He stopped. Near the toe of his polished Italian leather shoe, resting on a final notice from a hospital billing department, was a photograph. It wasn't a digital print. It was an old Polaroid, the square white border yellowed with age, the colors washed out by time and cheap film. Leo stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to undergo a sudden shift in pressure, vacuuming the oxygen from his lungs. He didn't bend down immediately. He just stared at it. The ambient hum of the warehouse below, the drumming rain, the ragged sound of Nora's breathing, it all faded into a roaring silence. Slowly, deliberately, Leo crouched. He picked up the photograph by its edges, handling it as if it were unexploded ordnance. The image showed a young woman sitting on the hood of a faded, rusted 1989 Chevy Caprice. She wore a faded denim jacket, a cigarette dangling loosely from her lips. She was looking off camera, laughing at something, her eyes crinkled. But the defining feature, the thing that made the blood in Leo's veins turn to ice water, was the jagged silver scar bisecting her left eyebrow. The scar he had given her 30 years ago. A cramped, suffocating foster home in South Boston. A space heater placed too close to a polyester curtain. The fire had gone up in seconds. 10-year-old Leo had been playing with the spark plug that started it. 14-year-old Carla had grabbed him, throwing him through the shattered ground floor window. A falling beam had caught her face. When the fire trucks came, Carla told the police she started the fire. She took the blame. She was sent to a juvenile detention center in upstate New York. 3 months later, a low-level mafia enforcer who couldn't have kids of his own adopted Leo. Leo spent his 20s building an empire of blood and shadow. He spent his 30s trying to find Carla. Private investigators' bribes to state officials scouring census records. Nothing. She had fallen off the face of the earth, swallowed by the cracks in the system that she had thrown him over. And now she was sitting on a Persian rug in his office. Leo stood up. He didn't look at Nora right away. He kept his eyes on the faded Polaroid, feeling a violent, unfamiliar tremor in his hand. He forced it to stop. He clamped down on the surge of emotion, guilt, grief, disbelief, and buried it under a layer of frost. "Let her go, Dex," Leo said softly. Dex released Nora, immediately taking a large step back. Nora rubbed her arm, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between the door and the imposing man holding her picture. Leo finally looked at her, really looked at her. He stripped away the wet coat and the desperation searching for the architecture of the face beneath, the cheekbones, the slope of the jaw. It was there. Watered down, exhausted, but there. "Who is this?" Leo asked. His voice was a flat, terrifying whisper. Nora swallowed. "It fell out of my wallet. It's just a picture. Give it back." Leo took a slow step toward her. The predatory grace in his movement made Nora freeze. He stopped a foot away from her, close enough to smell the cheap, rain-soaked wool of her coat, close enough to see the micro-tremors in her jaw. "I asked you a question, Miss Hayes. Who is the woman in the photograph?" Nora lifted her chin, defiance in the face of a predator. "My mother." The words landed like a physical punch. Leo didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened so hard a muscle ticked near his ear. "My mother." "Where is she?" Leo asked. Nora's eyes hardened. The fear receded, replaced by the brittle defensive anger of someone who has nothing left to lose. "Why do you care? You run a shipping cartel. You don't care about a dead woman in a Polaroid." The word dead dropped into the room like a stone into a deep well. Leo felt a cold numbness spread from his chest to his fingertips. All those years searching, all that money, the private detectives who promised leads that went nowhere, the nights he lay awake, wondering if she was freezing on a grate somewhere while he slept on 1,000-thread-count sheets. She was gone. She had died while he was looking the other way. "When?" Leo asked. The single word was heavier than lead. Nora looked confused by the intensity of his interrogation, but the sheer gravity of his presence compelled her to answer. 3 months ago. Ovarian cancer. The treatments bankrupted us. Happy now, give me my damn picture, and I'll leave." She reached out, attempting to snatch the photo from his hand. Leo didn't move. He let her pull it from his fingers. He looked down at the scattered papers on the floor. He saw the final notice from Massachusetts General Hospital. Amount due $142,000. He saw a disconnect notice for electricity. Carla had died in agony, drowning in debt, leaving her daughter to beg for scraps from the very underworld that Leo controlled. The bitter irony of it tasted like ash in his mouth. Leo took a breath. When he exhaled, the Mafia boss returned. The cold, calculating sociopath who ran the eastern seaboard replaced the grieving boy from South Boston, but the underlying objective had changed. "Dex," Leo said, turning back toward his desk. "Pick up her papers." Dex blinked clearly, thrown by the sudden shift in protocol. "Boss?" "Pick them up. Put them in the folder." Leo sat down heavily in his chair, picking up his fountain pen. "Miss Hayes." Nora, who had been edging toward the door, stopped. "What?" "You're hired." The job was a ghost role. Nora knew it the moment Arthur, a severe man in a tailored 3-piece suit who smelled of peppermint and violence, showed her to her desk the next morning. It wasn't in the main administrative bullpen on the second floor, where 30 actual employees pushed papers to make Atlantic shipping look legitimate. Instead, she was placed on the third floor, down a long, dimly lit corridor from Leo Moretti's corner suite. Her office was a windowless room that smelled of old dust and ozone. It contained a heavy metal desk, a dual-monitor computer setup, and 12 filing cabinets packed tight with heavily redacted route logs from the late 90s to the present. Your mandate is discrepancy analysis, Arthur had told her, handing her a plastic keycard. You find where the numbers don't match the fuel consumption, the toll records, or the dock fees. You compile a report every Friday. You do not speak to the floor staff. You do not ask about the cargo. You do not leave this floor without notifying me or Mr. Moretti. Who am I auditing? Nora had asked, genuinely curious. Arthur offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ourselves. Internal theft is a nuisance. Find the rats. For the first week, Nora existed in a state of suspended animation. She waited for the other shoe to drop. You didn't walk into a mob boss's office, insult him, drop your trash on his rug, and get handed a job paying 3 times the market rate in unmarked cash. It didn't happen. Yet it was happening. Every morning at 8 a.m., she swiped her card. She drank the bitter coffee from the break room down the hall. She buried herself in the spreadsheets, and slowly her forensic mind took over. The fear was pushed aside by the puzzle. She was good at this. She began finding the bleed-subtle skims off fuel budgets, bloated overtime hours on night runs. She also realized she was being watched, not overtly. But there was a small domed camera in the corner of her ceiling. It had a tiny red light that was always on. Down the hall in his expansive office, Leo watched her. He had a dedicated monitor on his desk switched to camera 14. He didn't stare at it all day, but his eyes flicked to it constantly. He watched her work. He noted the way she chewed on the end of a cheap ballpoint pen when she was frustrated. He watched her eat lunch, usually a single apple or half a dry sandwich she brought in Tupperware, saving the rest for later. She was practically starving. The $140,000 medical debt was a mountain crushing her. Arthur said so, Leo said one afternoon, not looking away from the monitor as his right-hand man entered the room. You have the background report. Arthur walked over and dropped a thick manila envelope on the desk. Everything from the day she was born. Nora Carla Hayes. Father unknown. Raised by her mother, Carla Hayes, mostly in Queens, then moved up here 10 years ago. Mother worked 3 jobs. Diner waitress, cleaning staff, night shift at a textile plant. Rough life. Nora was the golden child. Full ride to BU for accounting. Lost everything when she tried to play hero at Vanguard. Leo opened the file. He flipped past Nora's pristine academic records to the medical records of Carla Hayes. He read the clinical descriptions of her decline. Stage 4. Metastasized. Palliative care. His chest felt tight. A familiar cold anger coiled in his gut. The system had ground Carla into dust. She had saved his life, and he had built an empire of blood, completely oblivious to her suffering. The medical debt, Leo said, his voice quiet. Who holds it? A collections agency out of Delaware, Vulture Capital Group. They're preparing to garnish her wages, assuming she gets a legitimate job on paper. By the agency, Leo said. Arthur paused. He looked at Leo, a slight frown creasing his forehead. By the debt, you mean? No. Leo looked up, his dark eyes flat and deadly. I mean by the entire agency. Liquidate it. Burn the paper. Make the debt cease to exist. Do it by Friday. Arthur knew better than to argue with that tone. Understood. He lingered for a moment, looking at the monitor, showing Nora typing furiously on her keyboard. Leo, forgive me for overstepping, but what is she doing here? She's a civilian, a liability. If the feds get to her, she's under my protection. Leo cut him off. Why, Leo closed the file. Because I owe a debt that I can never repay. This is the interest. On Thursday evening, the rain returned, drumming against the warehouse roof. Nora was still at her desk at 8:30 p.m. Her eyes burned. She was tracing a phantom route log that didn't align with the EZ Pass toll data for a truck moving through Jersey. The door to her office opened. Nora jumped, her hand instinctively going to her chest. Leo stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just a dark grey dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing a faded tattoo of a dagger on his inner wrist. He held 2 heavy crystal glasses and a bottle of expensive bourbon. "You're past your shift," he said, stepping into the room. The space was instantly too small for him. He moved with a quiet, dominant gravity that sucked the air out of the room. "I found a discrepancy in the March logs," Nora said, her voice sounding a little too thin. She pushed her chair back slightly. "Truck 44. The driver claimed he blew a tire and sat on the shoulder of I-95 for 6 hours. But the toll timestamps show he diverted to a warehouse in Newark, stayed for exactly an hour and got back on the highway." Leo walked over to her desk. He didn't look at the monitor. He looked at her. "Driver's name? Boyle. Thomas Boyle." Leo nodded slowly. "Boyle will be handled. Thank you." He set the glasses down on her desk, right over a stack of printed spreadsheets. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into each. He slid one toward her. "I don't drink on the job," Nora said, eyeing the glass. "You're off the clock," Leo said. He picked up his glass. "Drink. You look like you're about to shatter." Nora hesitated, then reached out and took the glass. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm, calloused. The brief contact sent a weird electric jolt up her arm. She pulled back quickly, taking a sip. The bourbon burned all the way down, spreading a sudden fierce heat in her empty stomach. "Why am I here, Mr. Moretti?" Nora asked softly, looking down at the glass. "Really? You didn't hire me because of Vanguard. You didn't hire me because I'm brave. You were going to let your guard throw me out." She looked up, meeting his dark, unreadable eyes. "Then you saw the picture of my mother. Why?" Leo took a slow sip of his drink. He looked at her face, tracing the lines of Carla in her daughter's features. The stubborn chin, the dark eyes. He wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. If he told her the truth, that he was the reason her mother had a scarred face and a criminal record that kept her in poverty, she would hate him. And for a reason he couldn't entirely articulate. Yet Leo found that he did not want Nora Hayes to hate him. "I knew her." Leo lied, his voice remarkably steady. "A long time ago, before you were born." Nora's eyes widened slightly. "You knew my mother. How?" "We ran in the same circles," Leo said vaguely. "She did me a favor once, a significant one. We lost touch. She never mentioned you." "I would be surprised if she had," Leo said, a bitter, cynical smile touching the corner of his mouth. "I wasn't exactly someone a mother would brag about knowing." He set his glass down. "Your medical debt has been cleared, Nora." Nora froze. The name he had used, her first name, didn't even register against the shock of the statement. "What?" "That's impossible. It's over 100 grand. The agency." "The agency made an administrative error and wiped your file," Leo said smoothly. "It happens. A stroke of luck." Nora stared at him. The cynical part of her brain, the part that had survived the Vanguard fallout, and the brutal reality of poverty screamed at her. Mob bosses didn't do favors. They bought souls. You bought it. She breathed horror and profound relief warring in her chest. You paid it off. Oh my God. I owe you $140,000. Leo leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of her desk. He was close enough that she could smell the bourbon and the expensive dark cologne on his skin. You owe me nothing, Leo said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. You work for me now. You do your job. You find the rats. And you don't ask questions about the ghosts in my past, and I won't ask about yours. He stood up, taking his bottle, leaving the glass. Go home, Nora. Get some sleep. He walked out, leaving the door open. Nora sat alone in the quiet office, staring at the empty doorway, the taste of expensive bourbon lingering on her tongue, realizing with terrifying clarity that she had just traded one impossible debt for a much, much more dangerous one. 3 weeks passed. The crushing weight of the medical debt had vanished, and in its absence, Nora's body began to remember how to function. The dark circles under her eyes faded from bruised purple to a dull grey. She started eating whole sandwiches at lunch. She bought a new winter coat, a thick charcoal wool peacoat that didn't smell like a damp thrift store. She was surviving, but the paranoia had set in. You do not erase $140,000 debt out of the goodness of your heart. Not in Leo Moretti's world. Nora knew this. She understood transactional relationships. The corporate world was built on them. But Leo had asked for nothing. He barely spoke to her. Since the night with the bourbon, she had only seen him in passing a dark suit, flanked by quiet, dangerous men, moving through the warehouse floor like a shark cutting through a reef, so she poured her anxiety into the work. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she found the ghost shipments. She was cross-referencing the tare weights, the unladen weight of the shipping containers, against the customs declarations for a fleet of ships leaving for Rotterdam. The numbers were beautiful in their complexity, a massive web of international logistics. But Nora didn't look at the web. She looked for the broken threads. Container 409-BU was logged at an empty weight of 8,500 pounds. The customs manifest signed it off at 8,500, but the waystation receipt from the New Jersey Turnpike, time-stamped 3 hours before it hit the port, clocked the truck's axle load at a number that meant the empty container actually weighed 9,200 pounds. 700 pounds of ghost weight. Nora dug deeper. She pulled the records for the last 6 months. It wasn't just 409B, it was dozens of containers, always the Rotterdam route, always exactly 700 pounds heavier than they should be. Someone was moving serious contraband on Atlantic Shipping's dime, hiding it in the walls or the false floors of the empty containers on the return trips. She traced the authorization signatures. They all routed back to a single shell, LLC, which after 2 hours of digging through corporate registries, she tied to a man named Dominic Vane. Dominic was Leo's capo for the docks. He ran the floor. Nora sat back in her chair. The hum of the computer fan seemed abnormally loud in the windowless room. She rubbed her eyes. If she reported this, she wasn't just finding a rat. She was pointing a finger at a great white shark. She printed the spreadsheets. She placed them in a clean manila folder. She didn't wait for Arthur. She walked out of her office down the long corridor and past the heavy mahogany doors into Leo's suite. Dex stepped in her way immediately, his massive chest a brick wall. Meeting. No, Nora said, her voice tight. But he needs to see this. From inside the office, Leo's voice carried through the cracked door. Let her in, Dex. Nora pushed past the bodyguard. Leo was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the grey, churning water of the harbour. He wore a crisp white shirt, a dark tie loosened at the collar. He didn't turn around when she entered. "I told Arthur to keep you on the 3rd floor," Leo said. "Arthur isn't my boss," Nora replied. She walked to the desk and dropped the folder on the leather blotter. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack. Leo finally turned. His eyes dropped to the folder, then moved to her face. He noted the colour in her cheeks, the steady way she held her shoulders. The desperate stray dog he had taken in was starting to bare her teeth. He found he liked it. He walked to the desk and opened the folder. He didn't ask her to explain. He just read. For 3 minutes, the only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Leo's face remained an unreadable mask of marble. He flipped to the 2nd page, then the 3rd. When he reached the final sheet, the corporate registry linking the ghostweight to Dominic Vane, he stopped. He closed the folder carefully. He aligned it perfectly with the edge of the desk blotter. £700, Leo said quietly. His voice held no anger, which somehow made it terrifying. "Cocaine, most likely. Stashed in the corrugated lining. He's using my empty return containers to run his own side hustle. The skim has been happening for at least 8 months, Nora said, keeping her voice professional, detached. It's costing you dock fines and fuel, but more importantly, if customs flags one of these ghosts, the DEA seizes the whole ship. They freeze your assets. Dominic is gambling with your entire infrastructure." Leo looked at her. Really looked at her. "Do you know who Dominic Vane is?" "Your head of dock operations. He's also a man who broke a union leader's kneecaps with a lug wrench last year, because the man looked at him wrong," Leo said. He stepped closer to her. "If Dominic finds out you compiled this report, he will not fire you. He will gut you." Nora's stomach plummeted, but she held her ground. "That's why I brought it to you. You said find the rats. I found one." "You found a wolf," Leo corrected softly. He picked up the folder. "Go back to your office. Lock the door. Do not leave the building tonight until I send Dex to get you. Understand? What are you going to do?" "I'm going to restructure my management team," Leo said. He walked past her, the folder in his hand. "Lock the door, Nora." By 9 p.m., the warehouse had emptied out. The heavy machinery on the docks was silent, replaced by the howling wind coming off the Atlantic. Nora sat in her office, the deadbolt thrown. She tried to work, but the numbers blurred on the screen. She kept waiting for the sound of gunfire. She didn't know how the Mafia handled human resources disputes, but she doubted it involved severance packages. At 9:30 p.m., her desk phone rang. It was an internal line. She snatched it up. "Hello, Miss Hayes." It was Arthur. His voice was clipped, breathless. "Dex has been delayed. I need you to leave the building now. Take the south stairwell, go straight to the underground garage. My car is running in spot 12, black sedan. Go." "Arthur, what's going?" The line went dead. Nora didn't hesitate. She grabbed her peacoat and her bag. She slipped out into the hallway. The 3rd floor was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of emergency lights. The main power had been cut. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She moved quickly, her boots silent on the carpet, heading for the heavy fire door of the south stairwell. She pushed it open and started down the concrete steps, taking them 2 at a time. The air in the stairwell was freezing. She reached the bottom level P1. She pushed the heavy metal door open and stepped into the underground garage. It was dark. The overhead fluorescents flickered, casting long, strobing shadows across the concrete pillars. She scanned the lot. Spot 12. There was a black sedan idling there, its taillights glowing red in the gloom. Nora let out a breath she didn't know she was holding and jogged toward it. She was 10 feet away when the driver's side door opened. It wasn't Arthur. A man stepped out. He was built like a cinder block, wearing a heavy leather jacket. He held a suppressed pistol casually by his side. From behind a concrete pillar to her left, another man emerged. Nora stopped. The primitive part of her brain screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. "Nora Hayes," the man by the car said. He had a thick Boston accent. He smiled, but it looked like a tear in a piece of raw meat. "Dominic says hello." Nora backed up her hands, raising instinctively. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. You just like playing with spreadsheets," the second man said, flanking her, cutting off her path back to the stairwell. "Dominic doesn't like nosy accountants. Says they ruin the margins." Nora's breathing hitched. She looked around wildly. The garage was a concrete tomb. No cameras down here. No witnesses. The man with the gun raised it, aiming center mass. "Nothing personal, sweetheart." The gunshot never came. Instead, a sound like a melon being struck with a baseball bat echoed through the garage. The second man, the one flanking Nora, violently pitched forward. He hit the concrete face first, a throwing knife buried to the hilt in the base of his skull. The man with the gun spun around, startled. From the shadows behind the black sedan, Leo emerged. He didn't look like a CRO. He looked like death. He wore a dark, tactical sweater, moving with a silent, terrifying velocity. The gunman fired. The suppressed weapon made a quiet phut sound. The bullet sparked off the concrete pillar next to Leo's head. Leo didn't flinch. He closed the distance in 3 massive strides. He didn't draw a gun. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it brutally outward. The bone snapped with a sickening crack. The man screamed, dropping the gun. Leo didn't stop. He drove his knee into the man's ribs, a concussive impact that collapsed the gunman's lungs. As the man folded in half, gasping for air, Leo grabbed him by the back of the neck and slammed his face into the hood of the idling sedan. Once. Twice. A third time. The metal crumpled. Blood sprayed across the black paint. The man went limp, sliding off the hood and leaving a thick red smear behind. It took less than 5 seconds. Nora stood, frozen, her hands covering her mouth. A scream lodged sideways in her throat. She stared at the bodies. She had known who Leo was. She had known the reality of his business, but knowing it in the abstract was entirely different from watching a man get his face destroyed 10 feet away from her. Leo stood over the unconscious man. His chest heaved slightly. He wiped a streak of blood off his knuckles onto his dark trousers. He kicked the suppressed pistol under the car. Then he turned to Nora. His eyes were entirely black in the dim light. The civilized veneer was gone, stripped away to reveal the apex predator beneath. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. His voice was a harsh rasp. Nora shook her head, unable to speak. Her knees suddenly lost their structural integrity. She stumbled backward, hitting a concrete pillar and sliding down it until she was sitting on the cold floor. She was shaking violently, her teeth chattering. Leo cursed softly. He walked over to her, his heavy boots crunching on the loose gravel. He crouched in front of her. He didn't try to touch her. He knew what he looked like. He knew she was looking at a monster. "Look at me," Leo commanded. Nora forced her eyes up. She expected to see coldness. Instead, she saw a frantic, terrifying relief. "They missed Arthur," Leo said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing rhythm. "They intercepted his call. Dominic is dead. I handled him upstairs. These were his loose ends. It's over." Nora swallowed hard, pointing a trembling finger at the man with the knife in his neck. "Is he?" "Yes," Leo said bluntly. "He's dead. The other one will wish he was." He finally reached out, taking her hands. His hands were large, rough, and stained with fresh blood, but they were incredibly warm. "I told you," Leo said softly, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles, grounding her. "You are under my protection. I meant it. Come on, we can't stay here. The cleanup crew is coming." He stood pulling her gently to her feet. Nora leaned into him, too terrified to care that she was pressing herself against a murderer. She just wanted to feel alive. Leo wrapped a heavy arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the sight of the bodies, and guided her toward a private elevator, hidden behind an unmarked steel door. The private elevator didn't go to the 3rd floor. It went to the 5th level that didn't exist on the building's blueprints. The doors opened into a sprawling minimalist penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass offered a panoramic view of the storm, battering the Boston harbor. The furniture was dark leather and brushed steel. It smelled of expensive cedar and rain. Leo locked the elevator with a biometric scan. He guided Nora to a long leather sofa and gently pushed her down. "Stay here," he said. He walked into an adjacent room, returning a minute later with a thick wool blanket and a glass of water. He draped the blanket over her shaking shoulders and pressed the glass into her hands. "Drink it," he ordered gently. Nora took a sip. Her teeth clinked against the glass. The silence of the penthouse was a stark, jarring contrast to the brutal violence in the garage. She stared at the water, her mind trying to process the frantic data of the last 10 minutes. Leo walked to a sleek, wet bar in the corner. He poured a heavy measure of scotch into a glass and drank it neat in one long swallow. He set the glass down and braced his hands on the counter. His head bowed. Under the harsh pendant light above the bar, Nora saw it. Leo was wearing a dark, tactical sweater, but in the struggle, the collar had been torn, pulled violently down his left shoulder. Exposed against his olive skin was a massive, sprawling web of scar tissue. It was old, shiny, and tight. It crawled up from his chest over his collarbone and disappeared beneath the fabric of the sweater. It was a burn scar. Severe. 3rd degree. Nora stopped shaking. The glass in her hands grew heavy. She stared at the scar. Then an image flashed in her mind. The worn Polaroid photograph. The jagged silver line bisecting her mother's left eyebrow. I knew her. A long time ago. She did me a favor once. A significant one. The math in Nora's forensic brain started to run. She was an accountant. She looked for patterns, for timelines, for the hidden ledgers. Her mother had the scar before Nora was born. Carla never talked about it. Whenever Nora asked, Carla would change the subject, her eyes going dark and distant. But once when Nora was 16, and Carla had come home drunk after a double shift, she had touched her scarred face and whispered to herself, "I saved him. I got him out." Nora had always assumed it was a bad relationship, an abusive boyfriend. She looked at Leo. The timeline. The age difference. The Mafia boss who paid off a $140,000 debt without blinking. The man who just killed for her. "Mr. Moretti," Nora said. Her voice was raspy, but the shaking had stopped. Leo turned around. He saw where she was looking. He quickly pulled the collar of the sweater up, adjusting the fabric to hide the scar. It was a small defensive gesture, completely at odds with the violent man in the garage. "Leo," he corrected quietly, leaning back against the bar. "I think we're past formalities, Nora." Nora stood up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, pooling on the leather couch. She walked toward him. She wasn't afraid. Not of him. The terror of the ambush had been burned away by a sudden, blinding clarity. She stopped 3 feet away from him. "Where did you get that scar?" she asked. Leo's jaw tightened. "An accident, a long time ago. My mother had a scar. Nora said, her eyes locked on his. On her face. She said she got it pulling someone out of a fire. Leo didn't move. The ambient noise of the storm outside seemed to mute itself. He looked at her, his dark eyes warring with the instinct to lie and the exhaustion of carrying a ghost for 30 years. Coincidence? Leo said, his voice flat. I don't believe in coincidences, Nora countered, stepping closer. I'm an auditor. Coincidences are just bad math. You didn't run in the same circles as my mother. She was a waitress in Queens. You run a criminal syndicate in Boston. The only way you cross paths is if you knew her before. Leo looked away, staring out the window at the rain lashing the glass. His silence was deafening. She was 14, Nora said softly, piecing it together aloud. She had a juvenile record for arson in South Boston. The state sealed it, but I found the docket number once, 1989. You would have been, she calculated his age. 10. Leo closed his eyes. Did she start the fire? Leo. Nora asked, her voice cracking slightly. Leo exhaled. It was a ragged, painful sound. He opened his eyes and looked at her. The predator was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, ancient grief. No, Leo whispered. She didn't. I did. Nora inhaled sharply, taking a half step back. I was playing with a spark plug. Leo said the words spilling out like blood from a reopened wound. In the foster home, I caught the curtains. The whole room went up in seconds. I was trapped under a burning shelf. Carla. He swallowed heavily. Carla came in. She pulled the shelf off me. Her bare horns. She threw me through the window. He reached up, touching his collarbone through the fabric. The beam came down as she pushed me out. It caught her face. When the cops came, she told them she did it. She knew if they blamed me, they'd send me to a state facility for troubled boys. I wouldn't have survived it. So she took the fall. They sent her to juvie. I got placed with the Moretti family. She traded her life for mine. Nora stared at him, the world tilting slightly on its axis. You're the reason her life was ruined. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Yes, Leo said. He didn't flinch from it. He accepted the sentence. I spent 20 years looking for her. I had the money to fix it. I was going to give her everything. But I couldn't find her. She changed her name, moved. By the time you dropped that photograph on my floor, she was already gone. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. She thought of her mother. The double shifts, the cheap apartments, the pain of the cancer made worse by the terror of leaving Nora with nothing. All of it traced back to the man standing in front of her. The man who had just saved her life. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to scream. But looking at Leo, seeing the devastation in his eyes, she realized he hated himself far more than she ever could. So that's what this is, Nora whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. I'm not your accountant. I'm your penance. Leo stepped toward her. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a physical weight. You were, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intense murmur. When you walked into my office, you were a debt I had to pay. He reached out slowly. Nora held her breath as his rough knuckles lightly brushed the wet path of a tear on her cheek. The contrast of the blood on his hands and the absolute gentleness of his touch was dizzying. But you're not a debt anymore, Nora, Leo said, his eyes burning into hers. Dominic didn't try to kill you tonight because you were a ghost from my past. He tried to kill you because you are mine. The possessive weight of the word settled over them, heavy and irrefutable. Nora looked up into the eyes of a mafia boss, a murderer, and the architect of her mother's tragedy, realizing with terrifying certainty that she had no desire to run away. Nora did not pull away. The bloody knuckles against her cheek were a grotesque juxtaposition to the tenderness in his eyes, but it made perfect sense. This was Leo. He was the violence in the garage, and he was the boy who had carried the guilt of a fire for 30 years. "I'm not a possession," Nora said softly. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "No." Leo agreed. His thumb stopped moving. He let his hand drop the physical distance between them, returning cold and immediate. "You're a civilian, and right now, you're a target. Dominic is dead, but the people he was moving weight for are not. They will want answers. They will want the money he owes them." The private elevator chimed. Leo shifted his posture instantly, realigning from a man bearing his soul to a predator anticipating a threat. He stepped cleanly in front of Nora, his hand moving to the small of his back where a secondary weapon rested. The heavy steel doors slid open. Arthur stepped out. He looked immaculate, save for the dark, wet smear of blood on the lapel of his tailored suit. He carried a suppressed Sig Sauer in his right hand, pointed strictly at the floor. "The garage is clear," Arthur said, his voice a calm, clipped monotone. "The cleanup crew is currently dissolving the liability. The van will be on its way to the incinerator in 10 minutes. He paused, his eyes flicking to Nora, then back to Leo. The third man talked before he expired. Dominic wasn't just skimming. He was brokering a hostile takeover of the Rotterdam route. The ghost weight, it belongs to the Costa Syndicate. Leo's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked beneath his scarred collarbone. The Albanians. Yes, and they know Dominic missed his check-in. They have heavily armed assets moving into the city. They think we're weak because you purged your own capo. Arthur holstered his weapon. "We need to move to the compound. Now." Leo nodded. He turned to Nora. "Gather your things. Arthur will take you to a safe house in Vermont. It's off the grid. You'll have a new name, a new social, and enough money in a Swiss account to disappear." Nora stared at him. The command was absolute. He was packing her up, shipping her off like a delicate piece of cargo. He was saving her again. She hated it. "No," Nora said. Leo paused, his dark eyes narrowing. "This isn't a negotiation, Nora. You're an accountant. You don't know what these people do to civilians." "I know exactly what they do," Nora snapped. The adrenaline from the garage had finally metabolized into a cold, hard focus. "They operate on margins. They operate on cash flow. You think you can just shoot your way out of a war with the Albanians? How many men do you have? 50, 100? The Costa Syndicate operates across 3 continents. You kill one crew, they buy another." She walked past Leo, heading for the heavy oak table where her damp peacoat and bag lay. She pulled her laptop from the canvas tote. She slammed it onto the table and flipped it open. "Dominic was using your infrastructure, which means his payments to the Costa Syndicate are buried somewhere in your corporate architecture." Nora said, her fingers flying across the keys as the screen flared to life. "I have the routing numbers for the shell company he used to authorize the ghost containers. Give me access to the unredacted master ledgers. The real ones." Arthur took a step forward, his polished facade cracking. "Leo, she's a liability. If the feds ever get their hands on her. If the feds get me, they get an accountant who was coerced under threat of death." Nora shot back without looking up from her screen. "But if the Costa Syndicate gets you, they take the port, they kill you, and then they hunt me down anyway, because I'm the one who flagged Dominic's skim. I'm already in this." She stopped typing and looked directly at Leo. "You can't buy my safety, Leo," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce, grounded whisper. "You paid my debt. Now let me pay yours. Let me find their money. You want to hurt a cartel, you don't shoot their soldiers. You empty their bank accounts. Leo looked at her. He saw the sharp, uncompromising line of her jaw. He saw Carla's defiance, resurrected and sharpened by a decade in the corporate meat grinder. He didn't see a victim. He saw a weapon. "Arthur," Leo said slowly, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "Give her the encryption keys to the master server." Arthur exhaled a long, sharp breath. May God have mercy on us all. He pulled a titanium flash drive from his vest pocket and tossed it onto the table next to her laptop. "We leave for the compound in 2 minutes," Leo said. He stepped close to the table, leaning down until he was eye level with Nora. "If you do this, there is no going back to a normal life. You understand that you touch the real ledgers. You are permanently in the dark with me." Nora picked up the flash drive. She looked at the blood still staining Leo's knuckles. "I've been in the dark my whole life, Leo," she said. "At least here I have a desk." The Moretti compound sat on 30 acres of heavily wooded land in upstate New York, 40 miles from the city limits. It wasn't a mansion, it was a fortress dressed in stone and timber. For 48 hours Nora did not sleep. She sat in the cavernous underground study, wrapped in one of Leo's oversized cashmere sweaters, her eyes burning as she stared at 3 massive monitors. The master ledger was a terrifying labyrinth. It was brilliant, horrifying, and complex. It took her 12 hours just to map the architecture of Leo's legitimate fronts versus his illicit cash flows. Once she understood the machine, she started hunting the parasite. Upstairs, the war was entirely physical. The Costa Syndicate had struck 2 of Leo's warehouses in the city. 7 men were dead. The tension in the compound was a living, breathing thing. Heavily armed men patrolled the perimeter. The smell of gun oil and stale coffee permeated the ventilation system. Leo came down to the study sporadically. He didn't ask for updates. He simply brought her food, a plate of scrambled eggs. She barely touched a cup of black tea. He looked increasingly hollow, the violence above ground taking its toll. Every time he entered, Nora saw a new smudge of dirt, a new tension line bracketing his mouth. At 3 a.m. on the 3rd night, the proximity alarms outside the compound wailed. The sound was a mechanical shriek that vibrated through the concrete walls of the underground study. Almost immediately, the heavy thud of suppressed automatic gunfire echoed from the tree line above. Nora flinched her hands, hovering over the keyboard. The heavy steel door to the study slammed open. Leo stood in the frame. He wore a Kevlar vest over a black tactical shirt. He held a matte black rifle. His eyes were wide, feral. "They breached the outer gate," Leo barked. "Arthur is holding the driveway. Lock this door. Do not open it unless you hear my voice." "Leo, wait. Lock it, Nora," he roared, slamming the door shut before she could finish. The deadbolt engaged automatically with a heavy metallic clunk. Nora was alone. The gunfire above grew louder, shifting from the distant pop of rifles to the terrifying staccato roar of close-quarters exchanges. Dust rained down from the ceiling tiles onto her monitors. Panic seized her throat, tight and suffocating. She wanted to hide under the massive mahogany desk. She wanted to curl into a ball and pray. She looked at the screens. She was tracing a series of microtransactions Dominic had routed through a shell company in Cyprus. It was a tedious, agonizing process, peeling back layers of corporate fiction. You want to hurt a cartel? You empty their bank accounts. Nora forced her hands down to the keyboard. Her fingers were shaking so badly she hit the wrong keys twice. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath of the stale, dusty air and opened them. She stopped looking at the numbers as money. She looked at them as blood. Every dollar flowing into the Cyprus account was a bullet being fired at the man fighting above her. She typed. The gunfire upstairs was deafening now. She heard a heavy explosion that rattled the coffee mug off the edge of her desk. It shattered on the floor. Nora didn't flinch. She broke through the third firewall of the Cyprus Holding Company. There it was, the Costa Syndicate's operational fund for the entire eastern seaboard. $42 million sitting in a centralized offshore account waiting to be dispersed to pay off the local politicians, the hitmen, the dock workers. It was protected by biometric authentication and rolling encryption keys. She couldn't steal it. It would take a team of state-sponsored hackers a month to drain it. But she didn't need to steal it. She just needed to burn it. Nora opened a secure, encrypted terminal. She bypassed the withdrawal protocols and attacked the account's compliance metadata. She flagged the $42 million with universally recognized digital markers for international terrorism funding. She tied the routing numbers to known ISIS shell corporations on the Interpol watch list. She hit execute. It took the global banking algorithm exactly 4 seconds to detect the markers. On her screen, the status of the Costa Syndicate's operational account shifted from active to frozen, pending international investigation. The money was gone, not stolen. Just locked in a digital vault that would invite the scrutiny of every major intelligence agency on the planet. The Albanians couldn't pay their soldiers. They couldn't bribe the port authorities. They were functionally bankrupt on the East Coast. Nora slumped back in her chair. Her chest heaved. The screen glowed an angry, sterile blue in the dim room. Above her, the gunfire abruptly changed cadence. The sustained assault faltered. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The shooting stopped, entirely replaced by the chaotic shouting of men securing a perimeter. Nora sat in the silence, staring at the frozen account screen. Footsteps approached the study door. Heavy, exhausted. Nora. It was Leo's voice. Rough, breathless. Nora stood up. Her legs felt like water. She walked to the door and hit the release button. The heavy steel door swung open. Leo leaned against the doorframe. He was covered in drywall dust and blood. A shallow, bleeding gash ran along his left cheekbone. His Kevlar vest was scored with white impact marks. He looked like a man who had walked through hell. He looked at her, his eyes scanning her frantically for injuries. Finding none, his shoulders dropped an inch. They pulled back. Leo said, his voice a hoarse rasp. Middle of the firefight. Their comms lit up and they just retreated. We captured one of the perimeter spotters. He said the hit was called off. The bosses in Europe cut their funding. The local crew is totally exposed. He looked at her, truly registering the dark circles under her eyes, the fierce, terrifying intelligence radiating from her exhausted frame. "What did you do?" he whispered. Nora looked back at the monitors. "I flagged their operational funds for terrorism compliance. Interpol just seized $42 million. The Costa Syndicate doesn't have the cash to buy a cup of coffee in Boston right now." Leo stared at her. The silence in the underground study was absolute. The monstrous reality of what she had accomplished settled over him. He had fought a desperate, bloody holding action. She had ended the war with a keystroke. He took a step into the room. He let his rifle slip from his fingers. It clattered loudly against the concrete floor. He walked toward her, closing the distance until there was no space left between them. He reached out his large, blood-stained hands, cupping her face. He didn't care about the dust. He didn't care about the violence he had just committed. "You." Leo breathed, his forehead resting heavily against hers. "You are terrifying." Nora let her hands come up, resting flat against the rough fabric of his tactical shirt, feeling the frantic, heavy beat of his heart beneath the Kevlar. "You hired an auditor," she whispered back, closing her eyes. "I balanced the books." The morning sun crested over the tree line, casting long, pale shadows across the estate. The cleanup was well underway. The bodies of the Costa mercenaries had been removed, the blood washed from the cobblestone driveway. The only evidence of the war was the shattered windows of the West Wing and the lingering smell of cordite. Nora stood on the heavy timber balcony extending from the master suite. She wore Leo's sweater, nursing a cup of black coffee. The cold upstate air bit at her cheeks, grounding her. She had survived. More than that, she had won. She heard the slide of the heavy glass door opening behind her. Leo stepped out onto the balcony. He had showered. The blood and dust were gone, replaced by the clean scent of cedar soap. He wore dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt. The bandage on his cheekbone was stark white against his olive skin. He looked battered, exhausted, but entirely present. He walked up beside her, resting his forearms on the wooden railing. They didn't speak for a long time. They just watched the wind strip the dead leaves from the oak trees. "Arthur is contacting our contacts in the State Department," Leo said quietly, breaking the silence. "The Costa Syndicate is imploding. Without the operational funds, their local lieutenants are flipping to the feds for immunity. The route is ours again." Nora took a sip of her coffee. "Good." Leo turned his head to look at her. "You saved my life. You saved mine first, in the garage." "I owed you," Leo said. Nora lowered her mug. She turned to face him fully. The morning light caught the sharp angles of her face, illuminating the exhaustion, but also the iron resolve that had always been there, buried under debt and fear. "Let's get one thing straight, Leo." Nora said, her voice steady and clear. "The debt is zero. It's wiped. What happened 30 years ago with the fire, you didn't do it maliciously. You were a terrified 10-year-old kid. My mother made a choice. She chose to save you. And if she could see what you became, the man who was willing to die for her daughter in a parking garage, I think she'd say it was a good trade." Leo stared at her. His chest tightened painfully. For 30 years he had carried the ghost of Carla Hayes like an anvil around his neck. He had built his empire as a monument to his own self-hatred, punishing himself by living in the dark because he believed he didn't deserve the light. Hearing Nora absolve him didn't erase the past, but it unlocked the cage. He reached into his back pocket. He pulled out the worn, yellowed Polaroid photograph. He had carried it with him since the night she dropped it on his office rug. He held it out to her. "I believe this belongs to you," Leo said softly. Nora looked at the photo, her mother young, scarred and laughing on the hood of the rusted Chevy. She reached out, but she didn't take the photo. Instead, she placed her hand over Leo's, closing his fingers back around the picture. "Keep it," Nora said. Leo's brow furrowed. "Nora, it's the only picture you have of her." "I don't need the picture to remember her," Nora said, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. "I need you to keep it, so you remember that she didn't save a monster. She saved a boy." Leo's breath hitched. The walls he had built, the cold sociopathic armor that had kept him alive in the underworld for 2 decades, finally fractured. He dropped the photo onto the wooden railing. He reached for her, pulling her flush against him. His hands tangled in her dark hair, and he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate bruising and deeply human. It tasted like black coffee, lingering adrenaline, and the absolute relief of survival. Nora kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. They were not good people. The corporate world had broken Nora's morality, and the underworld had forged Leo out of violence. They existed in the grey, murky waters of a corrupt city, but as Leo pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the cold morning air, Nora knew she wasn't drowning anymore. "You're not going back to the 3rd floor," Leo murmured, his eyes locked on hers, dark and possessive. "I know," Nora whispered. Arthur needs help balancing the new routing accounts anyway. He's terrible at masking shell corporations. A low, genuine laugh rumbled in Leo's chest, the first time she had ever heard the sound. It was rough, unused, and incredibly beautiful. You're going to bankrupt my enemies and terrorize my right-hand man, Leo said, his hands sliding down to rest securely on her waist. I'm going to run your empire, Leo, Nora corrected, with a cynical, tired smile. You're just going to provide the security. Leo looked out over the sprawling fortified compound, then back to the woman who had walked into his office with nothing but a plastic folder and dismantled his entire world. Deal, he said. Wow, if that explosive finale left you breathless, smash that like button. Right now, Nora didn't just survive the Mafia. She conquered it with a laptop and sheer brilliance, proving that brains beat brawn every time. What did you think of Leo and Nora's grounded, gritty romance? Did you expect Nora to freeze the cartel's bank accounts to save Leo? Drop a comment below with your favorite moment. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe for more intense, dark, and deeply human audio dramas